I stood in my own driveway, watching Corinne Morrison hold out her manicured hand with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Behind her, three other HOA board members waited like backup dancers in expensive blazers. The manila envelope in her other hand contained what she claimed were legal documents. Documents that supposedly gave her the right to demand keys to my yacht and my vacation home in the mountains. "You have 48 hours," she said, her voice dripping with fake authority. "The new luxury asset oversight policy requires all homeowners to surrender keys to properties worth over $200,000 for community safety and compliance verification." I felt my world tilt sideways. In 15 years of living in this neighborhood, I had never heard anything so ridiculous. But Corinne stood there like she was announcing the weather, completely serious about taking control of assets I had worked 20 years to afford. That was when I realized this woman had no idea who she was messing with. 3 weeks earlier, I was living what most people would call the American dream. My house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in Willowbrook Estates, a well-maintained community where property values stayed high and neighbors mostly kept to themselves. I had earned every square foot of my success through 2 decades of 12-hour days and careful investments. My yacht, Second Chance, was docked at the marina 20 miles away. My cabin in the mountains was where I escaped when the city became too much. I was not the richest person in the neighborhood, but I was comfortable. More importantly, I minded my own business and expected others to do the same. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was drinking coffee on my back deck, checking emails before another day at the office, when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Corinne Morrison standing on my front step with what looked like an official delegation behind her. Corinne had been the HOA president for 3 years. She was the type of person who treated every minor rule violation like a federal crime. Her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes made her look like she belonged in a country club, rather than knocking on doors about garbage can placement. "Good morning," she said when I opened the door. Her smile was too wide, too practiced. "I hope you have a few minutes. We need to discuss some important new community policies." Behind her stood 3 other board members. Tom Bradley, our treasurer, who always looked uncomfortable during confrontations. Sandra Wells, who had moved to the neighborhood 6 months ago and somehow landed on the board immediately. And Mike Torres, who nodded along with whatever Corinne said. "What can I help you with?" I asked, stepping onto my front porch. Corinne opened the manila envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. "The board has implemented new regulations regarding luxury assets owned by community members. For insurance purposes and community safety, we need to conduct periodic inspections of all properties worth over $200,000. I blinked. "I am sorry, what properties?" "Your yacht and your vacation home," Corinne said, like she was reading from a grocery list. "We need keys to both properties so our appointed inspectors can ensure they meet community standards and do not pose liability risks to other homeowners." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually took a step backward. "You want keys to my yacht and my cabin?" "That is correct," Corinne said, her voice taking on an edge of impatience. "This is not a request. The new policy was voted on unanimously by the board and goes into effect immediately. You have 48 hours to comply." Tom Bradley shifted uncomfortably behind her. Sandra Wells stared at her phone. Mike Torres just nodded. "I need to see the documentation for this policy," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Corinne handed me the papers. "Everything is here. Legal requirements, inspection schedules, compliance deadlines. The policy clearly states that failure to comply will result in fines of $500 per day, plus potential legal action to place liens on your primary residence. I scanned the documents quickly. They looked official, with fancy letterhead and legal language, but something felt wrong. The whole situation was insane. "You realize my yacht is not in this community," I said. "My cabin is 3 hours away in the mountains. How exactly does the HOA have authority over properties that are not even in this state?" Corinne's expression hardened. Property ownership by community members affects everyone's property values and insurance rates. If you have questions about the legal authority, you are welcome to consult with your attorney. But the deadline remains 48 hours. She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and just so you know, we have already identified several other homeowners with similar luxury assets. This policy applies to everyone equally." As they walked away, I stood on my porch holding papers that claimed to give my HOA the right to enter and inspect my private property. The absurdity of it made my head spin, but the threat was real. Corinne Morrison had just declared war on my financial independence. I had no idea how deep this rabbit hole would go. That night I could not sleep. The paper sat on my kitchen table like a bomb waiting to explode. I had read them a dozen times, and each reading made me angrier. The language was full of legal terms and official-sounding phrases, but the core message was simple: surrender your keys or face financial destruction. I started with the HOA governing documents. Every homeowner received a copy when they purchased their property, but I had to admit I had never read them carefully. They were boring, full of rules about lawn maintenance and architectural guidelines. Normal stuff. What I found in those documents did not match what Corinne had given me. The original HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions were written in 1998 when the community was first developed. They covered standard items: property maintenance, architectural approval for major changes, common area usage, and annual assessments. Nowhere in the original documents was there any mention of luxury asset oversight or property inspections outside the community boundaries. But as I dug deeper, I found amendments, lots of them. The first suspicious amendment was dated just 6 months ago. It expanded the HOA's authority to include community-wide risk assessment and insurance liability management. The language was vague, but it seemed to give the board broad powers to investigate anything that might affect the community's financial stability. The Second Amendment was even more concerning. Dated 3 months ago, it specifically mentioned luxury asset disclosure and compliance verification. This was the foundation Corinne was using to justify her demands. Here was the problem. I had no memory of voting on these amendments. In fact, I had no memory of receiving notice about them at all. I pulled out my files and went through every piece of mail I had received from the HOA in the past year. No notices about proposed amendments. No ballots asking for homeowner approval. No meeting announcements discussing major policy changes. According to the HOA's own governing documents, any amendment to the covenants required a majority vote of all homeowners, with at least 30 days' notice before the vote. These amendments claimed to have been approved unanimously by the board, but there was no record of homeowner involvement. This was when I started to get suspicious about Corinne's motives. I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could find about Corinne Morrison and the other board members. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Corinne had filed for bankruptcy 18 months ago. Her divorce had been finalized a year ago, and according to public records, she had lost her house in the settlement. She was currently renting a small apartment across town and driving a 10-year-old sedan. Sandra Wells, the newest board member, had a history of involvement in financial schemes. A quick online search revealed she had been involved in at least 3 different multi-level marketing companies and had been sued twice for breach of contract. Tom Bradley appeared to be legitimate, but I found out he had been pushing for a complete audit of the HOA's finances for months. His emails, which I obtained through a public records request, showed he had been asking questions about missing funds and unauthorized expenditures. Mike Torres was just a follower, but his financial situation was interesting. He had recently purchased a new truck and taken 2 expensive vacations, despite being unemployed for the past year. The pattern was becoming clear. Corinne Morrison was not just power-hungry, she was broke and desperate, and somehow she had convinced the board to target homeowners with valuable assets. I called 3 of my neighbors who I knew owned expensive items. 2 of them confirmed they had received similar demands. One for a classic car collection worth over $300,000, another for a boat and RV. But here was the interesting part. All 3 of us were among the wealthiest homeowners in the community. This was not a random policy. It was targeted harassment. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Tom Bradley called me directly. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice nervous. "But not on the phone. Can you meet me somewhere private?" We met at a coffee shop across town. Tom looked like he had not slept in days. "I never voted for those amendments," he said as soon as we sat down. Corinne presented them as emergency measures that did not require homeowner approval. She said the insurance company was demanding immediate compliance or they would cancel our coverage. "Was that true?" I asked. "I do not know, but I have been asking to see the insurance correspondence for months, and Corinne keeps saying the documents are confidential. She also will not let me see the HOA's bank statements or financial records." Tom leaned forward. "I think she is stealing money from the community fund, and I think these luxury asset inspections are part of a bigger scheme." As I drove home that night, I realized I was not just dealing with an overzealous HOA president. I was dealing with someone who was willing to break the law to get what she wanted. The question was, what exactly did she want? The next morning, I called every attorney I could find who specialized in property law. Most of them were booked for weeks, but when I explained what was happening, one lawyer agreed to see me immediately. Margaret Chen had been practicing property and HOA law for 20 years. Her office was filled with law books and case files, but her expression when I told my story was something I had never seen before: genuine outrage. "This is insane," she said after I finished explaining the situation. "I have been dealing with HOA disputes for 2 decades, and I have never seen anything this brazen." She took the documents Corinne had given me and spread them across her desk. "These amendments are fraudulent. There is no way they were legally adopted without homeowner notice and voting." "So what can I do?" I asked. "First, we need to understand that Corinne Morrison has committed several crimes here: fraud, extortion, and possibly conspiracy. The fact that she is demanding keys to properties outside the HOA's jurisdiction makes this even more serious." Margaret pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. "Tell me about the other board members. Do you think they are all involved, or is Corinne the ringleader?" I told her about my conversation with Tom Bradley and what I had discovered about Sandra Wells and Mike Torres. "It sounds like Tom might be willing to cooperate," Margaret said, "but we need to be careful. If Corinne realizes he is talking to you, she might try to remove him from the board or destroy evidence. What kind of evidence? Bank records, meeting minutes, correspondence with insurance companies. If she has been embezzling HOA funds, there will be a paper trail. We need to get our hands on those documents before she can destroy them. Margaret leaned back in her chair. Here is what I recommend. We are going to fight this on multiple fronts. First, we file a complaint with the State Attorney General's office. HOA fraud is a serious crime, and they have investigators who specialize in these cases. She made another note. Second, we file a civil lawsuit seeking injunctive relief. We want a court order preventing Corinne from taking any action against you or your property while we investigate her authority. How long will that take? The injunctive relief could happen within a few days if we can prove immediate harm. The criminal investigation will take longer, but it sends a message that we are not going to roll over. Margaret stood up and walked to her window. But there is something else we need to consider. If Corinne is targeting multiple homeowners with valuable assets, this might be part of a bigger scheme. We need to find out who else is involved and what the end goal is. What do you mean? Think about it. She demands keys to your yacht and cabin. What is she planning to do with those keys? Steal your property? Sell access to other people? Use them as leverage to extort money from you? The possibilities made my stomach turn. So what do? We gather evidence, we build a case, and we take her down. But we need to be smart about it. Corinne has already shown she is willing to break the law. If she feels cornered, she might escalate. Margaret returned to her desk and pulled out a contract. I want to represent you in this matter. My fee is reasonable, and I believe we can not only stop Corinne but also recover damages for the emotional distress and financial harm she has caused. As I signed the contract, Margaret gave me a list of tasks. I need you to document everything. Every conversation, every email, every interaction with Corinne or the board. We are going to build a case that shows a pattern of fraud and extortion. I also need you to reach out to other homeowners who have been targeted. The more victims we can identify, the stronger our case becomes. And finally, we need to be prepared for Corinne to fight back. She is not going to give up easily, and she might try to intimidate you or accelerate her timeline. I left Margaret's office feeling more confident than I had in days. For the first time since Corinne had shown up at my door, I felt like I had a plan. But I also knew the real fight was just beginning. That afternoon, I called Tom Bradley and arranged another meeting. This time, I had an attorney on my side and a strategy for exposing Corinne's crimes. I want to help, Tom said when I explained what Margaret had told me. But I need to be careful. If Corinne finds out I am working with you, she might try to remove me from the board before I can get access to the financial records. What do you need from me? I asked. Time. Give me a week to copy everything I can get my hands on. Bank statements, meeting minutes, correspondence files. Everything that proves Corinne has been operating outside her authority. And if she tries to stop you? Tom's expression hardened. Then we will know for sure that she has something to hide. As I drove home, I realized my quiet life in Willowbrook Estates was about to become very complicated. But I was ready for the fight. Corinne Morrison had picked the wrong homeowner to mess with. Corinne called an emergency HOA meeting for Thursday night. The notice went out to all homeowners with less than 24 hours warning, which violated the community's own rules about meeting notifications. But I suspected rule following was not Corinne's priority anymore. I arrived at the community center 15 minutes early. Margaret had advised me to bring a notebook and record everything, which I planned to do. About 20 homeowners showed up, which was actually a good turnout for our usually apathetic community. Karen stood at the front of the room with her usual commanding presence. She wore a navy blue blazer and carried a leather portfolio that made her look like she was running a corporate board meeting rather than a neighborhood association. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," she began. "We have some important community business to discuss, including new compliance requirements that affect several homeowners." She gestured toward me. "As some of you know, we have implemented new policies regarding luxury asset oversight. These policies are designed to protect our community's financial stability and ensure all homeowners are contributing fairly to our shared expenses." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. This was exactly what I had expected. Karen was trying to publicly shame me into compliance. "I would like to address that," I said, standing up. Karen's expression tightened. "This is not a discussion period. We are here to review board decisions, not debate them." "Actually," I said, keeping my voice calm, "according to the HOA's governing documents, homeowners have the right to speak at all board meetings. And since you called this meeting specifically to discuss policies that affect me, I think I deserve a chance to respond." A murmur went through the room. Karen clearly had not expected me to fight back publicly. "Fine," she said, "but please keep your comments brief." I opened my notebook and looked directly at her. "I have spent the last week researching the legal authority for these new policies. What I found is very interesting. The amendments you claim give the board authority over luxury assets were never presented to homeowners for approval. According to our own governing documents, any amendment to the covenants requires a majority vote of all homeowners with at least 30 days' notice." Karen's face was getting red. "The board has emergency authority to implement policies necessary for community protection." "Where is that authority written?" I asked. "I have read the original governing documents from 1998, and I cannot find any provision that allows the board to unilaterally change the fundamental rules of the community." "Your objections are noted," Karen said, her voice getting louder. "But the policies remain in effect. If you have legal concerns, you are welcome to consult with your attorney." "I have consulted with my attorney," I said, "and she has advised me that demanding keys to properties outside the HOA's jurisdiction constitutes extortion under state law." The room went dead silent. Karen's face went from red to white. "That is a serious accusation," she said. "It is a serious crime," I replied. "My attorney has already filed complaints with the state attorney general's office and the district attorney. They are very interested in investigating claims of HOA fraud." Tom Bradley was sitting in the front row, and I saw him nod slightly. Sandra Wells was staring at her phone, and Mike Torres looked like he wanted to disappear. Karen tried to regain control. "This meeting is about community business, not personal legal disputes. If you have issues with board policies, you can file a formal complaint through the proper channels." "I have filed complaints through the proper channels," I said. "Multiple complaints, with multiple agencies." I turned to address the other homeowners. "I want everyone in this room to know that the board is demanding keys to properties that do not belong to the HOA, properties that are located outside this community, properties that the board has no legal authority to inspect or control. Furthermore," I continued, "the board has implemented these policies without homeowner approval, in direct violation of our governing documents. And when I asked for documentation of their authority, They provided fraudulent amendments that were never legally adopted. Karen slammed her hand on the table. That is enough. You are being disruptive and disrespectful to the board. I am being honest, I said, and I think these homeowners deserve to know the truth about what their board is doing. Several homeowners started talking at once. I heard someone say fraudulent amendments, and someone else ask about legal authority. Karen tried to restore order. Everyone please calm down. We are here to discuss community business, not listen to conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theories, I said. I have documentation, I have legal opinions, I have evidence of crimes being committed by this board. I pulled out the papers Margaret had prepared. My attorney has identified multiple violations of state law, including fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. The district attorney's office has opened a formal investigation. Karen's composure finally cracked. You are trying to intimidate the board with legal threats because you do not want to follow community rules. I am trying to protect this community from a board that has exceeded its authority and broken the law, I said. And I am not the only homeowner who has been targeted. I looked around the room. How many of you have received demands for access to property outside this community? How many of you have been threatened with fines and liens if you do not comply with policies you never voted on? 3 hands went up, then 2 more. Karen realized she was losing control of the room. This meeting is adjourned, she said, gathering her papers. Actually, Tom Bradley said, standing up, I have a motion to make. Karen froze. This is not the time for motions. I move that the board conduct a complete audit of all financial records and policy changes implemented in the past year, Tom said. And I move that all enforcement actions be suspended until the audit is complete. I second that motion, said a woman I did not recognize. Motion carries, Tom said, looking directly at Karen. The board will schedule a special meeting within 2 weeks to present the audit results. Karen stuffed her papers into her portfolio and stormed out of the room. Sandra Wells and Mike Torres followed her, leaving Tom alone at the board table. As homeowners started filing out, several of them approached me. They wanted to know more about the legal complaints and how they could protect themselves. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had allies. But I also knew Karen Morrison was not going to give up without a fight. The next morning, I woke up to find my car keyed and my mailbox knocked over. The message was clear. Karen was escalating her tactics. I called Margaret immediately. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she said. Karen knows she is in trouble and she is trying to intimidate you into backing down. What do I do? Document everything, take photos, file a police report, and whatever you do, do not let her scare you into dropping the case. I spent the morning taking pictures and filing reports. The police officer who responded was sympathetic but cautious. HOA disputes can get nasty, he said, but property damage is still a crime. We will investigate. That afternoon, Margaret called with news. The district attorney's office has assigned an investigator to your case. They want to interview you next week. What kind of questions will they ask? Everything. They want to know about Karen's behavior, the fraudulent amendments, the financial irregularities. They are treating this as a serious criminal matter. Margaret paused. There is something else. The investigator told me they have received similar complaints about HOA fraud in other communities. They think Karen might be part of a larger scheme. What kind of scheme? They are not sure yet. But there is a pattern of HOA board members targeting wealthy homeowners, and using fraudulent policies to extort money or gain access to valuable assets. The idea that Karen was part of a larger criminal organization was terrifying, but it also explained why she had been so confident in her demands. Tom Bradley called me that evening. "I have been digging through the financial records," he said. "What I found is worse than I thought." We met at the same coffee shop where we had talked before. Tom brought a box of documents that he had copied from the HOA's files. "Karen has been embezzling money for months," he said, spreading bank statements across the table. "Look at these withdrawals. 5,000 here, 3,000 there, all marked as consulting fees or administrative expenses." I examined the statements. In the past 6 months, Karen had withdrawn over $30,000 from the HOA's accounts. "What was the money supposed to be for?" I asked. "Landscaping, maintenance, insurance payments, normal HOA expenses. But when I called the vendors, half of them said they never received payment. The other half said they were paid much less than what Karen claimed." Tom showed me another set of documents. "These are the meeting minutes from the past year. Karen has been falsifying them. She claims the board voted unanimously on policies that were never even discussed." "How did she get away with it?" "Sandra Wells and Mike Torres just went along with whatever she said. They never asked questions or demanded to see financial records. And when I started asking questions, Karen told me the information was confidential." I looked through the minutes Tom had brought. They showed a pattern of increasingly aggressive policies, all designed to give Karen more control over homeowner assets. She was not just targeting me, I realized. She was building a system to extort money from the entire community. Tom nodded. "And when homeowners started complaining, she would use the threat of fines and liens to force compliance." "What about the other homeowners who received similar demands?" "I talked to them. Karen offered each of them a deal: pay a special assessment of $10,000 or surrender keys for inspection. Most of them paid rather than fight." The scope of Karen's crimes was staggering. She had been systematically stealing from the community while using fraudulent policies to extort additional money from individual homeowners. "We need to get this information to the district attorney immediately," I said. Tom agreed, "but we need to be careful. If Karen realizes what we have discovered, she might try to destroy the remaining evidence." "Or she might try to hurt us," I said, thinking about my damaged car. "I have been thinking about that," Tom said. "I want to resign from the board and go public with what I know, but I am afraid of what Karen might do." "You do not have to do this alone," I said. "My attorney can protect you as a witness, and the police are already investigating the property damage." Tom looked relieved. "Then let's do it. Let's take her down." We spent the next hour organizing the evidence and planning our approach. Margaret would present the financial documents to the district attorney, while Tom would provide testimony about Karen's behavior and the fraudulent board meetings. As we prepared to leave, Tom said something that chilled me. "There is one more thing. I overheard Karen talking to Sandra Wells about accelerating the timeline for asset inspections. She said they needed to complete the process before anyone could stop them." "What do you think that means?" "I think it means Karen is planning to actually use those keys soon." I drove home that night knowing that Karen Morrison was not just a corrupt HOA president. She was a dangerous criminal who was running out of time and options. The question was, what would she do when she realized her scheme was falling apart? The district attorney's office moved faster than I expected. Within a week of receiving Tom's evidence, They had obtained search warrants for Corinne's apartment and the HOA's offices. Margaret called me at 7 in the morning. They arrested Corinne an hour ago. Charges include fraud, embezzlement, extortion, and conspiracy. She is looking at serious prison time. I felt a mixture of relief and vindication. What about the other board members? Sandra Wells was arrested as well. The investigation showed she was Corinne's partner in the scheme. Mike Torres is cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for immunity. And Tom is being treated as a witness, not a suspect. His cooperation has been crucial to the case. Margaret paused. There is more. The investigation has uncovered evidence that Corinne and Sandra were part of a multi-state fraud ring. They were targeting HOA communities across the region, using the same tactics to extort money from homeowners. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Corinne had not been acting alone or improvising her schemes. She was part of a professional criminal organization that specialized in HOA fraud. How many other communities were affected? I asked. At least 12 that they know of. The FBI is coordinating with local prosecutors to bring charges in multiple jurisdictions. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, trying to process what I had learned. My quiet neighborhood dispute had uncovered a major criminal conspiracy that had been operating for years. The local news picked up the story that afternoon. I watched the evening report with a sense of surreal satisfaction as Corinne Morrison was led away in handcuffs. Former HOA President Corinne Morrison and associate Sandra Wells were arrested today on charges of fraud and extortion, the reporter said. Prosecutors allege the pair embezzled over $100,000 from homeowner associations and used fraudulent policies to extort additional money from individual homeowners. The report included interviews with other victims from different communities. Their stories were remarkably similar to mine. Demands for access to valuable assets, threats of fines and liens, and fraudulent amendments that were never legally adopted. The investigation is ongoing, the prosecutor said during a press conference. We encourage anyone who believes they may have been victimized by HOA fraud to contact our office immediately. Tom Bradley was interviewed as well. I am proud that we were able to stop this scheme before more people were hurt, he said. But I am also disappointed that it took so long for the truth to come out. The following week, Margaret and I met with the prosecutor to discuss the civil case. We are seeking full restitution for all victims, she said. Corinne and Sandra's assets are being frozen, and we expect to recover most of the stolen money. What about damages for emotional distress and legal fees? We are confident we can recover those as well. The evidence of intentional fraud and extortion supports substantial punitive damages. The civil case moved quickly. Corinne's attorney, faced with overwhelming evidence of criminal activity, advised her to settle rather than fight. Within 2 months, I received a check for $50,000, covering my legal fees, emotional distress, and punitive damages. More importantly, the court issued permanent injunctions preventing Corinne or anyone associated with her from serving on HOA boards or managing community associations. The ripple effects of the case extended far beyond my community. The state legislature passed new laws requiring greater transparency in HOA operations and stricter penalties for board members who exceed their authority. Several other communities discovered similar fraud schemes and were able to recover stolen funds. The FBI's investigation led to arrests in 6 states and the recovery of over $2 million in stolen money. Corinne Morrison was ultimately sentenced to 5 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all victims. Sandra Wells received 4 years and was banned from serving in any fiduciary capacity. The judge's comments during sentencing were particularly satisfying. This case represents a betrayal of trust that strikes at the heart of community governance, he said. The defendants used their positions of authority to prey on the very people they were supposed to serve. The victims in this case showed remarkable courage in standing up to intimidation and pursuing justice. Their actions have protected countless other homeowners from similar schemes. As I left the courthouse that day, I reflected on how much my life had changed in the past year. What started as an outrageous demand for keys to my yacht and cabin had become a crusade for justice that affected thousands of people. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was reconstituted with new board members and transparent financial oversight. Tom Bradley was elected president and immediately implemented reforms to prevent future abuse. My yacht and cabin remained safely in my possession, their keys hanging on my kitchen wall as a reminder of what I had fought to protect. But more than protecting my property, I had learned something important about standing up to bullies and fighting for what is right. Corinne Morrison had picked the wrong person to mess with, and in the end, justice had prevailed. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my yacht, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and orange. The keys to Second Chance were in my pocket, right where they belonged. The keys to my mountain cabin were safely at home, hanging on the same hook where Corinne Morrison had demanded I surrender them. The legal battle was over, but the impact continued to ripple through communities across the region. The law firm that had represented Corinne and Sandra was facing its own investigation for enabling the fraud. New regulations required HOA boards to obtain homeowner approval for any policy changes, and financial audits were now mandatory. I had received dozens of letters from homeowners who had been inspired by my story to challenge their own HOA boards. Some discovered similar fraud schemes. Others simply succeeded in stopping petty tyranny and abuse of power. Tom Bradley had transformed our community into a model of transparent governance. Board meetings were recorded and posted online. Financial records were available for inspection by any homeowner. And most importantly, the board's authority was clearly limited to legitimate community business. "You saved our community," Tom told me during our monthly coffee meeting. "But more than that, you showed everyone that ordinary people can fight back against corruption and win." The personal cost had been significant. Months of stress, legal fees, and constant worry had taken a toll on my health and peace of mind. But the alternative would have been worse. If I had surrendered my keys and paid Corinne's extortion demands, she would have continued victimizing other homeowners for years. My attorney, Margaret Chen, had become a friend and occasionally joined me for weekend trips to the cabin. "You know," she said during one of our conversations, "most people would have just paid the money and moved on. What made you decide to fight?" I thought about that question for a long time. "I think it was the absurdity of it," I finally said. The idea that some HOA president could just show up at my door and demand keys to property she had no right to control. It was so outrageous that I could not let it stand. But there was something else, I continued. I realized that if I did not fight, Corinne would just move on to the next victim, and the next one. Eventually, she would have turned our entire community into her personal ATM. The mountain cabin had become my refuge during the worst parts of the legal battle. Now it was a place of peace and reflection, where I could appreciate what I had fought to protect. I had learned that standing up to bullies is never easy, but it is always necessary. Corinne Morrison had counted on my fear and compliance to enable her crimes. When I refused to be intimidated, her entire scheme began to crumble. The yacht keys in my pocket represented more than just access to my boat. They symbolized the principle that hard work and honest success should be protected from those who would steal or exploit it. As the sun set over the water, I thought about Corinne Morrison sitting in her prison cell, probably still believing she had been treated unfairly. Some people never learn that actions have consequences. But I had learned something important. When someone tries to take what you have earned through honest work, you fight back. You document everything, you get professional help, and you never give up. Because in the end, justice is worth fighting for.